Welkom terug. Nou, ons het 'n baie belangrike gesprek wat ons vanoggend met voer is met Michael Swain. Hy is van Freedom of Religion South Africa. Dit is vir ECE. En ons gesels oor die nuwe ECE Toolkit. Nou, die ECE Toolkit se fokus is om kinders tussen die ouderdom van 0 tot 9 te leer van transgender-ideologie. Good morning, Michael, and welcome.
Good morning, and thanks so much for having me on the show.
Michael, let's start with what is the ECE Toolkit? Because I think a lot of people, when we mention the ECE Toolkit, has got no idea what it is. So let's start with what is the ECE Toolkit and where does it come from?
Well, the ECE Toolkit is a teacher training program, and it was developed by the Department of Basic Education. They were given a 40 million rand grant by a Belgian organization called VVAB. And essentially, it is pitched at teaching and training teachers of the pre-primary and primary school levels. So you're talking like, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, that kind of thing. And the big problem with it is that it isn't just training teachers with some kind of technique. I mean, it would be fine if it was some blackboard technique, but it's not. It's actually infusing transgender ideology into the whole classroom setting. And here we're talking about infusing it for little children. And I think maybe we should say immediately that, of course, people who do suffer from gender dysphoria, children particularly, they need to be treated with the greatest sympathy and respect. They need to be reasonably accommodated. That's what our Constitution says. But there's a big difference between that and literally putting an entire, let's say, framework for the education system within which they will be, all children will be learning, that is infused with transgender ideology.
Let me ask this. Why, if you know, why did this Belgium group decide to actually support this or develop this, I think, with the University of Stellenbosch, if I'm correct?
Well, yes, I mean, there are a lot of international organizations who put money behind certain things. For example, when we were tackling the issue of CSE, comprehensive sexuality education in schools, and there was a very, let's say, liberal program that government were particularly pushing in. Well, they've been given in that instance nearly a R500 million grant by an organization called USAID to basically do that. So obviously, international agendas do come into play here, and there's a sense of we are almost, in a sense, it seems to be somewhat of a guinea pig for this type of thing in the African context, because, of course, these values are often very contradictory to the values and the faith and the views of parents. And that's simply not because parents are anti-anything. They're just for their parental rights. Parental rights are a critical part of religious freedom. Your right as a parent, and it's guaranteed by international law and by South African law, is you have the inalienable right to educate your own children with your own values. And you expect also you have the right to be consulted by the state on whatever they're going to be using to educate. So, and by the way, just to say, this applies particularly, and it's emphasized in the early years of childhood development, because as Aristotle, the philosopher, said, give me a child unto the age of 7 and I'll show you the man. And of course, children at that age are so malleable, and it's so therefore important that parents know exactly what's going to be taught to their children, and that the views and values that they're teaching are simply not contradicted by anything that they might receive in the public school setting.
Michael, you're referring to two values. Obviously, in our Constitution, this is all enshrined, and the values in that it's set in stone. But now, what are the rights of the parents? A lot of these parents are saying, but how is this possible? We didn't agree to this. Did parents agree to it? Do parents have the right to give input on the situation? Or is it something that we can expect is just going to be steamrolled into South African education system?
Well, it is already happening. So that might answer your question. I mean, they've rolled this out already in 5 provinces. So this isn't something that they're planning to do, and they're planning to consult parents. And that's one of the big problems. A coalition of senior religious leaders from the Christian faith, from the Islamic faith, from the African traditional spirituality faith, at the highest level, represented by their most senior representatives, met with the Department of Basic Education and said, stop this, because parents don't know, and parents must know. That's their right. The inalienable right, the Department of Basic Education's own policy statement says, is for parents to educate their own children according to their own values. And that simply hasn't happened. And we further said that obviously this training must stop. And then we also asked for a family values unit to be established in the department, because they have set up what they call a social cohesion and equity unit, which obviously is also very much behind the types of views that are coming through in this toolkit. But I think I'd also like to say, if I could, we've been accused by the Department of Basic Education of spreading fake news. They even took our website and put a big stamp "fake news" over it. And we put a stamp saying "fact check" across the same meme that they put out, because I think it's important that parents actually hear what is in this toolkit, because otherwise they'll just think, oh, well, maybe it doesn't really apply, maybe it doesn't really matter.
I have to ask you, yesterday there was an article by IOL, and the Department of Education responded by saying to the outcry, the toolkit encourages the active involvement of parents and caregivers in their children's learning and provides evidence-based tips for reinforcing positive gender attitudes and behaviours at home. It's also important to note that the toolkit does not seek to erase or devalue the difference between boys and girls. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the easiest thing to say to that is not for me to say, but let the toolkit speak for itself. It says on page 9, for example, that early childhood development teachers and practitioners play a central role in, here I'm quoting, to help them, that would be the little children, break free from harmful gender stereotypes and hold them back in life. That presumably would be let's say, the biological binary of a man and a woman that their parents may have told them. It goes on to say, growing up, many of us, this is page 39, were taught that if you were identifying a single person by a pronoun, you had to use he or she. They was only for groups of people. Those rules have changed. It's like, well, since when did English grammar change? But this is also carrying on reading. They and them, this is what it says, is now a non-binary way to address someone. Using they and them lets children, so we're talking about, again, little 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, know that we cannot assume someone's gender identity just by looking at them. I mean, that is something which has been assumed for literally, almost since time immemorial. And they also say that teachers, by asking learners from a young age for their preferred name and pronoun, teachers can demonstrate the gender identity should not be assumed. Now, that doesn't sound to be neutral. And if that's what they're saying, and they're saying that this is just neutral, well, I think again, parents must judge for themselves. And I think the good news is that there now is an opportunity for parents to have their say. We have also worked with Dear South Africa, and there's a very quick link that you can go on the forsa.org.za website, and then you can go and you can literally write an email in about 2 minutes to the Department of Basic Education, and you can let them know whether you are for or against. I mean, some parents may be for this, and that's fine, because again, parents have the right to educate. But if you don't believe that, then obviously it's important that you would have your say, because we certainly believe, as for SA, and our position is simply a legal one, that parents have the right to be consulted, and they should have been consulted, because we do believe that this is something which brings a single ideology into the classroom. It's therefore not so much education as a form of indoctrination.
Michael, I want to say I read an article in The Guardian, and now this is an article that speaks about these kind of topics being addressed in schools back in 2015 in the UK already. And what was interesting, one comment from a parent on this article said the following. It said, if schools allow the space for children to be called by their preferred pronouns without letting parents know what that preferred pronoun is, you are letting children know that a school is a safe environment, but not their homes. And I think that's quite an important point to make, and you also spoke about it, it's the fundamental right of parents to be able to bring up their children in the way in which they see fit. What do you think about that? The fact that if we allow kids to go, this is my preferred pronoun at school, but we don't let the parents know what is happening in the classroom necessarily, you are creating that divide between child and parent.
You're absolutely correct. And of course, this is, I think, one of the central issues. If you're teaching small children that their parents and communities, which is what this toolkit says, by the way, hold to prevailing harmful gender roles and boundaries that hold them back in life, that can be very harmful to the parent-child relationship. That can also be harmful, by the way, to the parent-teacher relationship, because you're essentially putting a wedge between parents and their children. And again, by teaching children that we cannot assume someone's gender identity just by looking at them, they're literally being taught not to believe their eyes. Now, I think it's important to remember another principle in education, a constitutional principle. I think the paramount constitutional principle is what is in the best interest of children. Is it in the best interest of children to put levels of division and trust between them and their parents? We would say absolutely not. Is it in the best interest of children to teach them that something which is actually a biological fact? I mean, people may believe that they were born into the wrong body and that they have a gender that is not corresponding with their biological sex. And of course, that's their right to believe that. They may have very good reasons to do so, but not to teach little children. We're talking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. How can they possibly have the developmental capacity to discern what they're hearing? And so, yes, this is deeply concerning for many parents, we believe. And that's why, again, we've given parents, and we hope parents will take the opportunity to let the Department of Basic Education know by going to the forsa.org.za website what they think, because parents have not been properly consulted or in any meaningful way consulted in this matter.
Michael, some of the things that have been raised by the Department of Education is this might address gender-based violence, and it's also a good way to approach gender-neutral bathrooms at schools, for instance. Your opinion?
Well, gender-based violence is an interesting thing to say that this is, which they have. This is one of their core strategies to combat gender-based violence and femicide. And obviously, gender-based violence, number one, is a very complex issue. It's not a simple binary issue. It's to do with a lot of the socioeconomic status of women at the home. It's to do with even the defunct justice system. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there are cultural issues involved here. But what they're saying is that they're teaching little children that you can't tell the difference between a man and a woman. Therefore, I think you have to ask the logical question, well, then what is gender-based violence? Is gender-based violence against whom? And if they say women, then the question is, well, you're teaching children that there is no such thing as a woman or a man. You're just whatever you think you are. So surely you're just talking against violence. And what then is femicide? I mean, femicide is the murder of women. And so really you're just talking about violence and murder. But there's no logic to it, as you can hear. But also it undermines the standing of women. It potentially removes the safe spaces for women. It certainly has been seen all over the world now in the sporting codes to be very detrimental to women's ability to compete in their own, let's say, category of sport. So again, it is an extraordinary, let's say, logic that by teaching little children that there's no such thing as a man or a woman, you're somehow going to be addressing gender-based violence in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I also find that very interesting, and I agree with you. I think the gender-based violence issue is a greater issue, one that stems from different socioeconomic problems, a justice system, and it's not necessarily by having this neutral toolkit, teaching gender-neutral toolkit is not going to answer that. And you mentioned the sporting codes. We see a lot of sporting codes now going back to if you do compete at a certain level, you have to be biological female or male. You can't just, we have actually addressed that. Last question, if people do want to comment on this, can you just tell us again where they get to comment on this?
Well, we have set up an opportunity for them. If you go to the for Freedom of Religion South Africa website, that's forsa.org.za. There's a little button which says have your say. There's also a button, by the way, to say more information, because again, we've been accused of fake news. We're just saying to people, literally, look it up for yourself. I mean, we give you the references, the documentation's all there. So that would be the best place to go and have your say.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate the fact that you just came to share your knowledge this morning and also enlighten us about what's really going on. So thank you so much for your time this morning.